Now, within all of this, within SETI, we tend to define things with things like the Drake equation, and again, also the Fermi paradox, so-called Great Silence, and we use those to sort of define the question. What are your thoughts on the Drake equation, and is it even an equation, really?
Well, let me preface this by saying that I was quite close to Frank Drake, a lovely, lovely human being, very humble, a lot of wisdom with him. I always enjoyed listening to him. Just a genuinely decent human being. That having been said, the equation is truly ready for the ash heap of history. It's not only useless, it's counterproductive. It leads us into wrong ways of thinking. Almost every one of its factors is well, every one of its seven factors, which then multiply out to the so-called N, or the number of civilizations in the galaxy that we're able to communicate with. Every one of the factors is so badly wanting, out of step with reality, and that it should be just completely scrapped and dumped. I don't know. Take one at random, if you will. Well, let's start almost at the beginning. The rate of star creation is, I don't even know what it's doing in there. It's got no the rate at which stars are being created in the universe tells us nothing about how many civilizations eventually arise. The rate of star formation is now was 10 times higher in the past than it is currently. What the current rate of star formation is irrelevant. What is relevant is the number of stars that could possibly contain a civilization, and that number is hardly constrained at all. The whole gamut of stars, except for the largest that are going to supernova, are completely fair game for the determination of whether or not they house a civilization. So the next factor is the frequency in which stars form planets. Well, that's known already. It's for all intents and purposes, it's one. Every star system has planets, and not just one planet, but whole systems of planets. So one times anything else only equals one. So any factor that is unity or one can come out of the equation. The next factor is the number of Earth-like planets in a system. But wait a second, that presumes that only rocky planets within the so-called habitable system are habitable. No, that the habitable system where water can exist on the surface of the planet, that distance from this system is completely out of step with our current thinking. Life may exist in the clouds of Venus. There's been some indication of the discovery of phosphine, which only, as far as we know, is a byproduct of biological systems. Has been found in the clouds of Venus. Maybe there's life floating around in the clouds of Venus. Mars, we all know about. But further out, we've got the moon of Europa, which is covered in ice, and the ice in turn covers an ocean that has many times the amount of water as all the oceans on Earth put together. Going further out to Saturn, you have Enceladus, which is everybody's current favorite for the possibility of containing life. I mean, Enceladus has all of the ingredients for life. It's got carbon, hydrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, nitrogen, oxygen. Of course, it's got water aplenty because it too is covered by ice, and which covers an ocean. But below the ocean is apparently hydrothermal vents, just like were thought to be the source of life on our planet. In fact, trace amounts of methane, which could have also been observed in the geysers that are presumably shot out of Enceladus from these hydrothermal vents. So that's out already to Saturn. And now New Horizons discovered that Pluto also probably has an ocean that's covered up by the surface ice. So if the habitable zone goes from the clouds of Venus to the ocean of Pluto and maybe even further, what good is this entire notion of the habitable zone anyway? And in fact, this is not just a theory. I mean, this is NASA and many other space agencies are betting their budgets on the idea that the habitable zone is much broader than just the Earth and a little in and a little out from the Earth, because we're sending spacecraft to Saturn and Jupiter and so forth, looking for the signs of life.
I've always found that to be really, really unusually interesting as far as discoveries within my lifetime, because back in the 1980s as an amateur astronomer and teenager, I was like, there was only Earth, and maybe there might be something at Mars. We had this labeled release experiment that came back positive and stuff like that. But now the entire Kuiper Belt could be full of objects that have liquid water oceans because of radioactive decay in their cores. So there are habitable places in the solar system we don't even know exist yet.
Yeah, and not only and I think we need to take the even the word place as and look at it more broadly, because if you think of every hydrothermal vent and every pond and every cloud as a potential harbinger for the creation of life, then there could be billions or trillions of possible habitats for life in our solar system. So if we come up with, and if in our discoveries we do discover a sui generis form of life within our own solar system, in other words, a living or fossilized life form anywhere in our solar system that doesn't share our origin, In other words, we by panspermia did not arrive on Earth, or vice versa. That our biology has not infected that planet, but it's truly an independent genesis of life. And if we found that second origin of life within our own solar system, then it can only mean that life must be ubiquitous throughout the solar system. And so if the frequency of life throughout the solar system is again one or near one, it can come right out of the Drake equation. It doesn't mean anything, because one times everything is just everything all over again. So you can march right through the Drake equation and rip it apart in three different ways, or many different ways, and come to the conclusion that it's basically worthless. And not no solution to the Drake equation that we can pencil in any way, shape, or form is definitive. The solutions have been offered that go from one, ourselves, n equals one, us, to n equals 10 to the power of 8, and everything in between. So an equation that yields no definitive answer, but only asks the question, means basically it's crazy making, and let's just get back to doing SETI and searching for the answer, because that's the only way we're going to find it, is by searching.
You got to look if you're going to find anything, and if you don't look, you don't find anything at all. Now, a lot of people will make the case that we're already seeing evidence, of which I disagree with that somewhat strongly, but they say there's evidence that there's a civilization here in the form of the UFO phenomenon. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know anything more about UAPs than I do from the general media. I come to SETI from the perspective of astronomy and as a businessman, and try to ask what is ET's best way to communicate with us. And I came to the conclusion, quite independently of the UAP people and subject of UFOs. I've never seen a UFO. I've certainly never been beamed up by one. And come to a kind of similar solution, that ET's best way of making contact with us is to come here physically. However, I'm very unpersuaded by the evidence that I've seen to date on UAPs. All of us carry around first grade cameras in our pockets, and yet I haven't seen any first grade pictures. If 40 strangers to each other all took out their cameras or their iPhones in an airplane and filmed the same UAP, that I would find impressive. But so far I haven't seen that evidence. I don't have an explanation for why there are no sonic booms. The very immense accelerations that are reputedly attributed to UAPs are only accompanied by sonic booms. So where are the sonic booms? I presume that ET is not able to change the law of physics, and physics demands that when the air is pushed around at that great speed, it creates the shock waves. I haven't seen the multi-sensory evidence for UAPs. I've heard that there may be some radar corroboration that would be interesting. I haven't personally seen it in the newspapers. So at this point, I'm dubious. One thing I think is certain, though, that if UAPs are in our atmosphere and are alien, that they are robotic. The very accelerations that have been attested to so many times, incapable from human machines, would presumably create life-destroying G-forces on any little green men who would be in those machines. Again, they can't escape the laws of physics any more than we can.
Yeah, and also to add something to that is the fact that if you move something through Earth's atmosphere that rapidly, it's going to look like a giant meteorite. It's going to be so subject to friction.
Yeah.
And yet we don't really see that with the reports.